My father's dead, and my mother, I think she thinks it's okay.
Well, I guess I get back to one of the first questions I asked. If you were starting in music today, now you're doing computer music, but do you feel like, obviously you have something to say sitting here talking about the forces of evil, why wouldn't you translate that into music? Why would you go further away from music and maybe even humanity by getting into computerized music?
Well, for one thing, the machine that I'm using makes it possible to have completely accurate performances of the ideas that I come up with. And I got into music not as rock and roll. I first started off writing chamber music and orchestra music when I was 14. I didn't write a rock and roll song until I was 21. And the only reason I did that is because all the music that I wrote when I was a teenager and tried to get orchestras to perform it, I couldn't hear it. Nobody would play it. So if you write music, you want to have some of it heard, and so I went into rock and roll. But I have no problem with writing instrumental music and using a computer and getting my point across by coming on a show like this and just saying it right out.
But in the transition from doing chamber music to rock and roll, because you seem to be one of the great forerunners of, I guess, what would you call it today, heavy metal?
I tend to doubt that I was a forerunner of heavy metal. But if you say so.
How would you describe the music?
The kind of music that I play variety music. It's a lot. I have country and western songs. I have songs that sound, you know, like sort of heavy metal. I have other songs that sound like Broadway show tunes. I can write all different styles of music.
One of the ladies, I can't recall, one of the ladies who's involved with the group who was testifying to have the lyrics labeled, said that she felt that this event at the Senate in September, those hearings, were a break for your diminishing career.
Well, I'm sure that that's quite true, and probably much to their consternation, because I think that I have the kind of career that they would like to see diminish even further, because usually the more frequently I get the opportunity to go on television and say some stuff, the more POQ is involved. That's the question. And you know, go on, bleep it, I don't care. But
Frank,
America wants to hear it. Do you see that?
Frank, I must tell you, the forces of evil do not want to hear the word quotient on television.
I
know. In growing up with the music of the 60s, did you come in contact with a lot of those, the Bob Dylans? Were you a fan of his, or was he a fan of yours? And in some of those people, have you seen much change in their attitude, both about life and their music?
Well, you want a Bob Dylan story? I got one for you.
Will you use the word quotient?
Yes. No, I liked a couple of the early Bob Dylan albums. I didn't care for it too much when it was like purely folk music. Then he went electric, and he had a couple of albums there, and I really liked those.
Could you save that story until we take this break? We'll be right back with
Quotient.
We'll be right back
$49 a month, and that's with no down payment. So get all three, only at Duncut Ford, Avalon Boulevard at the San Diego Freeway in Carson.
Foreign policy competition.
Yeah.
Which one writes the worst foreign policy?
Exactly. Welcome back. We're talking to Frank Zappa. Frank, tell us the Bob Dylan story.
Well, one day my office got a call from somebody who said they were Bob Dylan, and we do get some strange phone calls, and nobody believed that it really was Bob Dylan, but it was. And to make a long story very short, he eventually wound up at my house. It was a freezing cold night, and we have a video monitor so we can see who was at the gate. And there was a guy standing at the gate. You know, I didn't recognize who he was, and he was just wearing a sports shirt, and I knew it was cold outside. You know, who is this? So I sent the engineer down to the gate to find out who it was, and it was Bob Dylan. So he comes in, and I'd never met him before. How you doing, Bob? And he wanted me to produce an album for him, so we played some songs and, you know, talked a little while. I said, well, come on up to the kitchen. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. And he comes up in the kitchen, and my dog growls at him. And I said, relax, Bob, my dog doesn't like Christians. And, but then I realized this was at the point where he had stopped being born again and was back to being Jewish. So I knew that he was very safe.
Why?
And don't hold it against my dog, because he has a right to make up her own mind.
You're going to, strangely enough, in spite of all this that's going on, you're going to be speaking at a religious seminar.
Yeah, well, it's at the Nebraska Wesleyan University School of Religion on April 7th. I'm going there to speak to them. Yeah.
And when did this come about?
I talked to the guy on the phone today.
Just happened today?
Yeah.
And will you use words like quotient?
Yes. So I explained to him on the phone, well, first of all, I needed to find something about the college. It's a Methodist-affiliated college. They have some fundamentalist instructors there, and I asked them, basically why they wanted me to go there, and they said that their school was interested in education rather than indoctrination, and that they like to bring in unusual points of view or differing points of view just to expose the student body to it. It's a liberal arts college. And I said, I'm in favor of education, and you want me to talk to you? I'll be there, and I'm going to talk.
How terrific. Good for them. And good for you. And we'll be right back after this.
Thanks.
Welcome back. Frank, you did an episode of Miami Vice, and a lot of the crew members around here, first of all, they thought you did a terrific job as an actor, but secondly, some of them said,
They're
gee...
easily amused.
No. Secondly, they were surprised that somebody whose music was anti-drugs.
And in person, I am anti-drugs, yes.
Yeah, and yet in that episode, you portrayed a kind of a pusher.
Well, you see, if you go on Miami Vice, there's not much choice of the roles. I mean, that's about it, And they didn't have a hairdresser or anything like that on the show at the time. So, but I think that anybody who would look at the character that I played on that show and thereby be induced to use drugs is in need of medical attention.
We're going to...
Because that was an ugly guy.
We're going to have to go now, but during the break, Frank said something really interesting about the Philippines, and I don't want to paraphrase him, or I don't want to quote him. Al, could you take a shot of Frank on camera 2, kind of a close shot, on camera 2? Is this camera 2? Is this camera 2? Oh, you're on 3. Look into Frank. No, Frank. Look into camera 3 and tell the audience at home exactly what you told me and the audience here during the break.
I think Imelda's 3,000 pairs of underpants we've been hearing about. They should auction those things off like they're doing with the Rajneesh's Rolls Royces. Just a little extra something for the Filipino people, because all the rest of that Marcos money that's stashed away they're trying to find. It doesn't belong to the Filipino people. It belongs to U.S. taxpayers, because it came from here before he embezzled it.
That's great. Frank, thank you very, very much for being here. Really appreciate your being here. Tomorrow night, ladies and gentlemen, Tracy Nelson and a musical tribute to the National Choir. Until then, remember, because you don't remember, you won't know what I just said. Thanks very much. See you then. Bye-bye.
Answer on